Welcome to the Low Carb Athlete Podcast, where we focus on discussing topics to help you burn fat, optimize health, and improve performance in life and sports. Transform the whole you from the inside out with the holistic method. Let's dive in. Here's your host, Debbie Potts.
This is Debbie Potts, and I'm excited once again. I always say I'm excited, but I'm always excited to get to podcast because it's part of my most exciting part of my day with this stay-at-home COVID, work-at-home, new life schedule. So podcasting is so fun to me and a great time to connect with other like-minded individuals, including Peter Defty, who's coming on the show today to talk about optimal fat metabolism that we spoke about a year ago almost with Peter. And also about Vespa, because I've been trying to get my endurance up running. And that's part of my story since my burnout and breakdown of my body systems that you can read all about in my book, Life is Not a Race, started in 2013. And I used to be able to do a marathon. I did Boston Marathon in 3 hours and 12 minutes. I did half marathons in hour 33, hour 35. Ever since my body burned out, my adrenal exhaustion started back then, 8 years ago now, I have not been able to run fast again. So not blaming the aging process at all. I embrace the aging process, and I realize now I have to heal my body as I've done over the years with functional lab testing. And recently we did a podcast with Ryan Monahan on my organic acids test. We did another podcast with Karan from Microbiome Labs on my microbiome and key bacteria that are involved in our metabolism are missing in my body, are really low, so they couldn't be detected. Also, organic acids test, I found I had mold toxicity that I never had tested before because no one ever ran an organic acids test on me. So ideally, you don't spend 8 years doing different labs. We call that the cycle of trial and error. And ideally, we run all the labs together and do a full investigation. That's what I do now, full-time as my job, as well as I'm coaching for Ben Greenfield now for his clients. But really looking at all these labs together, not doing one, wait, see what happens, then run another. It takes 8 years. So instead, spend a bunch of money, say $1,000 or so on running 3 to 5 functional lab tests based on your symptoms and your story. And we figure out what's actually going on instead of doing this long-term, try this, try that, doesn't work, move on. So that's not what I'm here to tell you, just a side note, but back to my original point. On today's show, we're going to talk about optimal fat metabolism and Vespa. And what I was getting to is talking about how running long runs on typically Sundays for us, that I struggle. And I find as my body's changed that I do best taking Vespa before I start. And on my long runs, I do more of a 4-minute run, 1-minute walk, and a fast walk. And I have struggled with that run walk and gotten over it because it's actually faster time for me. I can do more in the same amount of time because we run by time, say an hour and a half, hour 45 or 2 hours. And when I do Vespa, I've been experimenting with that the past month because I'm starting to go a little bit longer, that my body feels good and my recovery is very different, improved. So we're going to talk about that today on the show, as well as, well, maybe we'll get to it, but what I do want to do a podcast on one day is about less is more, as we've talked over the years about on the show, but how as a aging athlete, we might do better doing shorter workouts and more intervals. And I know we've heard a lot about that. Mike Mutzel was just doing an episode on that on his show, talking about more sprints. Brad Kearns is talking about that, just not doing the endurance, because that increases your cortisol, your hormones, stress hormones increase. And that causes more oxidative stress, mitochondrial damage. So there's a certain amount of that Goldilocks effect for everything that finding that right amount of stressor that's a good stress, not too little, not too much, just that right amount that's going to give you the optimal benefits. And as I'm 49, turning 50 this year, November, somehow I'm all about optimizing my health, improving my performance, and longevity. It's really about that aging process for me this year. But going back to Peter, the OFM, if you look at OFM.io, he has a good blog, many blogs on the paradigm shift, different philosophies that we've talked about in previous episodes, but fat is your fuel. Your own body is the major source of energy. The third one is damage prevention or over recovery, talking about that. Fat adaptation done properly actually increases carbohydrate tolerance and utilization. Number 5, chronic stress, my favorite topic to share with you, is a big issue, and concentrated forms of carbohydrates. Chronic stress is as big as an issue as concentrated forms of carbohydrates. So as I say all the time, every day, I'm trying to get this message out that chronic stress impacts the whole you from the inside out. And I have definitely been a good example of that. And now I feel like it's my purpose to help all of you avoid going through what happened to me back in the day. And I was going from top of my age group and doing my best races ever in 2012 and getting my best splits, and never been the same since. So you don't have to be an athlete to listen to this show. It's about health building. You can be an athlete of any level. It's not necessarily a triathlete or endurance athlete, but just realizing exercise is good, but not too much, not too little. And the holistic method, we talk about the 8 elements of the holistic method to really transform the whole you. So you are fit and healthy. Most athletes are fit and unhealthy under the hood. And until we investigate all these different clues through lab testing and really find your blood chemistry lab test, what's going on under the hood, we can't really work on optimizing our health, improving the aging process. So getting an individualized program that you're following that works for your body, for your genetics, your microbiome is really important, your metabolic type. So we've been trying to cover those topics on my show the past year and really talking about health and immune system, but realize that as an athlete, if you are training and racing in hotter temperatures, and just training a lot, you are probably causing more damage to your gut and having leaky gut, which is going to lead to inflammation and show up in different areas of the body, joint pain, skin issues, gut brain connection is a key to look at as well. So there's all sorts of things that relate to doing too much in life. So exercise is good, but not too much. And we have to be careful with that as people maybe overtraining as they stay at home and it's something to do to get outside. I know I like to get outside and do something in the morning, do something at lunchtime, and do something evening, but I do a little bit, less is more, and just get outside. So it doesn't have to be a 10-mile run every day. I did a short, easy run or bike ride this morning, and then I'll go for a 30-minute run, walk, workout this afternoon, and then maybe some yin yoga tonight. So I like movement throughout the day. So even if you're exercising each morning, make sure that you leave time to do something outside at lunchtime and at dinner. So what I tell my clients is that breakfast, lunch, and dinner isn't a signal to eat, it's a signal to move. Breaking your fast in the morning when you are hungry, have something to eat, but also do that after you have exercised. So fasted, lower intensity workouts in the morning, some movement, go for a walk or something in the afternoon, and then making sure you're doing lifting, strength training, lifting heavy things, and getting your strength training in 3 times a week is good. So you can learn lots from Peter and I today on the show, and let us know your questions. I know Stephanie Holbrook and I just did an episode on keto endurance, how to train for a low carb athlete in this year, and looking at the whole year plan. So hopefully all this information will help you figure out your planning for the year ahead. All right, let me get Peter and we'll talk OFM and Vespa. All right, gang, I have Peter on the show to talk about optimal fat metabolism and Vespa and all things necessary for us to improve performance and longevity, which includes optimizing our health, which means immune system as well. So thanks, Peter, for joining me in a great conversation we're going to have today, I'm sure.
Yeah, great to get up with you again, Debbie, because I know we're on the same page about our thinking about a lot of things. And as I was telling you earlier, the current situation with COVID is nothing but a wake up call, and the majority of people out there are listening to the wrong message. And it's not a bad message. I mean, yes, we've got to kind of control the spread, not so much that not so much to stop the fact that it kind of needs to go through the population at this point, because it was so badly botched from the beginning in China to coming to the Americas that I think that a lot of people within the health community, these experts already know that, but they can't publicly say it. So I'll say it because I've been the lightning rod for this ever since I started talking about fat for fuel. But what is not acceptable is that if it spreads to the point where really sick people aren't getting the health care they need, the treatment they need, and they're winding up with bad cases and dying, that's not acceptable. So we have to control it to control the healthcare system not getting overwhelmed. But that being said, one of the best strategies is for people to get metabolically healthy and get back to that metabolic state of burning fat as fuel, which is what evolution shaped us for. That little science we forget.
Yeah.
Evolution. Yeah.
I know I talked to Dr. Ken Berry yesterday and we had a great talk of just how simple it is, but we don't ever hear the truth from the media or government, because who's paying for the commercials, who's paying for, endorsing which politician and what grant, and everything is just so influenced that we never really hear the truth. So instead we have all these people dying because they're not getting the proper treatment and proper protocol to help build your health up. So you prepare your body, as I said, for an entire year now, to prepare your body for the day you're exposed to the virus, right? So both of us have been saying all this. You've been doing great vlogs, your video blogs for the past year, and really sharing this same information that we just need to keep getting it out there, even though it's been almost an entire year since this all started. And we're just still trying to educate everyone, and hopefully everyone can pay it forward, how we can be healthier and just how simple it is and how it doesn't cost anything really extra.
Yeah. And it's all about that metabolic fitness of metabolic health, because as I tell people, because you hear these things, well, oh, this person was an athlete or this child was healthy.
Yeah.
And you look at him, it's like not, or if you knew that athlete, you knew he was on a high carb diet. And it's pretty clear in the emerging research on COVID, and also in just the basic physiology of virus, how a virus develops and in a person and replicates, that it's a glycolytic process, and basically virus RNA hijacks your cells and metabolizes glycolytically. So the more prone you are to that, your cells are more disposed to glycolytic metabolism. The more they hijack it, the more oxidative stress you're creating, and that's why these things go bad. And now the research is saying, oh, if you're really well fat adapted or on a ketogenic diet, it really attenuates that replication. But to a point, as I was saying earlier, I actually contracted COVID in July from an elderly friend. He made it, but he was 2 weeks being sick. But I was helping him out and I contracted it, and I felt like my body was fighting off something for 4 days. And on the fifth day, I felt so much better. I was like, oh, and I didn't stop working, didn't stop running, didn't stop any activities. And I think that it's important for people to not trivialize the deaths and bad outcomes. We need to be studying that. But when you're looking at the current data suggesting 40% of the population is clinically asymptomatic, and then another 58, 59% is getting sick but getting over it without a bad outcome, we have to balance the death and bad outcomes with the reality that this this virus, if you don't have to be like totally fat adapted like Debbie or I or Mike Mutzel or any of these people out here saying this. You just have to be reasonably um, metabolically fit to overcome this. And this disease is not a mystery anymore. I mean, a lot of they're trying to keep it a mystery and keep that fear going, but we know it attacks the elderly and frail who are metabolically compromised. We know it attacks people who are obese or who have type 2 diabetes or other metabolic conditions that predispose them. And so, you know, people need to start paying attention to that. And while there isn't an easy answer, we should be asking questions rather than moving to this whole lockdown mentality that, you know, when you look at the history in this last year, they're telling us to all stay inside, huddle together in our homes, when now
Yeah.
the research is coming out that, hey, we should be outside in the sunlight. We should be practicing exercise. We should be getting more fat adapted. We should be getting sunshine for vitamin D. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, these are no brainers, and I really think it should be empowering to us to be able to do what we can do. I mean, you know, whether you're looking at the science or looking at it from a religious, spiritual context, you know, you go back to the serenity prayer, you know, give us the grace to do what we can do and let go of the other things. And people are working on this. You know, you've seen this vaccine come out. The vaccines are an important strategy to getting this under control. I'm not denying that, but the more people who are metabolically healthy and can have a COVID exposure that won't affect them, the more vaccines are available to people who are predisposed. And that's how we're going to be able to beat this. And to a point, one of my clients, she's an ICU doc and a trauma surgeon. I've been coaching her more on her endurance at the COVID ward. Um, and she's been exposed daily to COVID in her work, and she hasn't gotten sick. She hasn't gotten tested because they don't want to test people, because if they test positive, they're out of the system. They need these doctors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she decided she wasn't going to get the vaccine because she didn't need it. So there's a perfect example of somebody who's super metabolically fit. And even on top of that, in November, right before Thanksgiving, she ran her first 50-mile ultra. Now she's completed a couple Ironmans several years earlier, but she completed a 50-mile trail race, the JFK, and I ran with her because if you looked at her training, you would have said she would have never finished because of her COVID schedule, she had basically little to no training leading up to it, and she was able to complete 50 miles in 12 hours and change. So and she's a big believer in this whole thing because, you know, this metabolic fitness and fat adaptation gives you the flexibility to you know, take on pretty much everything.
So let's define that. How would you define metabolic health and metabolic fitness for people that hear those terms, but they're like, I don't really know what it is?
Well, you know, like I say, Debbie, I always go back to the fundamental question of what were the evolutionary pressures that shaped us as humans, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so in a real world context for the listener, you know, you're not having that hunger pang every 2 or 3 hours. You can go do a workout, um, physical activity, and not be famished or wrecked afterwards. Your recovery is not weeks. It might be a day or two of feeling tired, a little bit sore. Um, you're not constantly thinking of food. And of course, for a female, that's different from a male. I mean, males have it easier in this this thing, and as
Yes.
you know, as a woman, it's a little more complicated, but it's not impossible, right? And
Yeah.
you know, you can maintain a decent body weight. It's never perfect, especially for a woman, because like I say, evolutionarily, women are shaped and have evolved to be eating and saving
Reproduce.
for two.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're eating and saving for two. But that being said, because of that, you know, late gestation, childbirth, and lactation, you know, that evolutionary thing, just biology, you know, it's shaping you for that ultimate fat burn fest, right? Late
Yeah.
gestation, childbirth, and lactation, you can't hunt and gather, and you know, evolution made us so that you don't depend on the male to be around. Because
True.
again, as I say, you know, in most mammal species, the males go off in their bachelor herds.
Yes.
Um, so, for a female, it is a default, but getting you there is a big thing. And I think for females, one of the messages I want to have about that this in terms of what you're asking is your stress levels.
Hmm.
Females get distracted by too much stress, chronic stress in their life, and while you need a little stress to make you stronger, chronic stress is a bad thing. So if you're stressed all the time and worried, that's something you got to get a handle on. So these
That's,
are this kind of real world signs I would
yeah.
talk about to people in terms of assessing where they are.
I mean, that's what I do as a health fitness coach now is focusing on people's external chronic sources of stress and then identifying their hidden internal sources of chronic stress that are impacting their hormones, their immune system, digestion, detoxification, your energy, and your neurotransmitter production. It's like stress is so out there and people don't manage, the good balance of stress, that Goldilocks effect. I always say for everything that it kind of damages all of your efforts. So as I, wrote my book, Life is Not a Race, my whole story last 8 years, and what I did in their intro today is chronic stress impacts the whole you. So all efforts of trying to be low carb and be a fat burning athlete, you still have to manage that source of chronic stress. And I have a lot of clients myself that they're, busy with their kids or working full time, people that have kids with different epilepsy or some of the kids with autism, and then the husband. It's just amazing the stress out there that women have. I know men do as well, but they're juggling all these different roles that they don't prioritize their own health. And I think becoming metabolically healthy is just kind of what I say, the holistic method, working on all those elements to really be healthy, that it's not just going low carb and trying to just eat real food, that there's so many lifestyle factors that impact your ability to burn fat.
That's exactly it. And that's why I say the stress is just as big a thing as the carbs. And as you know, Debbie, for a type A female stress monkey, um, you know, going low carb can actually backfire initially, until you
Yeah.
can get that stress level off, because stress is a wonderful metabolic trigger for burning glucose. you
Yeah,
know,
it is
uh,
totally.
but but in order to really fat adapt and perform on fat, you've got to get those chronic stressors out of the equation. And one more thing that also I think that is a real world thing, is one of the first things we do when we work with athletes, is the snacking is another thing that if you're constantly snacking and feel like you need to eat, that's a big that's another big thing you want to kind of work towards moving away from, to 3 meals a day, and then maybe two, and then maybe one with a light meal, depending on your training load. Snacking is just insidious because of that disruption of the hormonal balance between insulin, ghrelin, and leptin.
Hmm.
You know,
So what's interesting is what you're saying is really the virus, the outcome of the virus when you get it depends if you're a fat burner or a carb burner. A
Essentially,
little
yes.
bit.
Yeah, no, essentially that, if you looked at that vlog I did, Getting Ahead of the Curve, and I cited the
Mhm.
literature, um, it's huge. And again, vitamin D is one of those elements that, um, we use to get people to perform on fat, because I've seen with athletes, if the standard medical reference range is 30 to 100 nanograms per deciliter. So let's just use the numbers. I won't go into the units, but 30 to 100. I found that for a fat adapted athlete, anything below 50 is
Yeah,
suboptimal.
that's what
As
I've
soon
heard
as they
too.
get,
50,
yeah,
60, even to 80.
I like to see them between 70 and 90,
Yeah.
actually. They're really doing well, but 50 is sort of like a threshold I've seen constantly. So, another thing, of course, you can't tell unless you get a blood test, but are you getting enough sun? And that's another murky middle thing, because if you're a carb burner, getting too much sun can be really bad for you. And that's where you know, this whole thing of people not exposing themselves to the sun, you look at the confluence of events that cause the variables to come together. You have people going away from, high fat diets to low fat and not saturated fats, and not eating red meat and the organ meat. And so their nutrition was down. So then all of a sudden their skin cell health was bad. So that if they got exposed to sun, that fatty acid compositional profile of the cells became bad. So they were subject, those cells were getting burned and mutating, and you'd get skin cancer, right? But
Mhm.
when you get somebody that's well fat adapted, the sun and they're sweating to cool those cells, you don't get that damage. You get the sun, you get the UVB, you start developing the vitamin D. I don't use sunscreen, and I'm in the
Mhm.
sun all the time. And you know me, I run almost 80-90% of the time with no shirt on, and
Yeah.
my skin is fantastic.
But that's what people need to
But
remember. You run with your shirt off. I think a lot of people say, "Oh, people in California, they're getting so many people are getting the virus, so much for the vitamin D theory." But I want to say, okay, you need to have your skin exposed to the sun. So, like at 60 degrees here, people put their long pants and long shirts on and jackets. Their skin's
well,
not
and
exposed.
yeah, and I love whenever I go out trail running, the majority of Asian females are like totally covered up.
Yeah.
And I wonder about all these weird things. Like one of my musings, just to humor the crowd, is I wonder, like in places like Afghanistan or Iraq, where the women are all covered up, they're these young men they're bearing are very manipulable because they're born with low vitamin D, which lead the correlation of anxiety, depression,
Mm.
all those psychological things are tied to vitamin D, and it's like,
Yeah.
but I digress. I'm going off on a tangent, but once again, we humans are moving ourselves so far away from those evolutionary pressures that shaped us. People with lighter skin that live in these northern latitudes, you look at the Russians, the Finns, when it's summer, they're out getting as much as they can,
Yeah.
and so it's just kind of interesting. So yeah, vitamin D, snacking, those are other factors that are key. And if you're doing blood tests, get your vitamin D. You have to ask for these things. You need to get your vitamin D checked. You need to get your fasting insulin checked. Those are
I
simple,
know.
easy
No one does
markers.
that.
Nobody
It's
does those
funny.
as standard parts of a standard panel. Cortisol tests. I don't think anybody needs a cortisol test because you know already whether you're a chronic stress monkey or not,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But
Metabolic chaos for
that's only,
sure.
yeah. So anyway, those are the real world sort of things to look for that anybody that's a listener can look for in their daily life.
Well, chronic
Take some
stress,
reflection. Yeah, take
people
some reflection.
exercising. Go ahead.
Yeah, it takes some reflection. It takes some self effort. I think the wonderful thing about you and I, Debbie, is we're trying to teach people to do this on their own, to think. And a lot of people, because of the convenience, they want to be told what to do. And that's another thing. We believe in you guys. You guys have a brain. That's like I say to people, your brain is your most powerful muscle. Use it for your good.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is, my goal is the word helped health optimizer last year, why we're not motivated to optimize our health and self-care. And now it's, I've had this struggle, and we'll move on off this topic to training with Vespa, but how people just think part of the whole solution is wearing the mask and social distancing, and that they're forgetting the other part of it is getting healthy. So I've been saying hashtag get healthy for a year now, that we need the exercise, we need real food, we need stress management, we need sleep is like almost number one to really get that good quality sleep. That's the other half of the solution. And then my struggle now is people, the vaccine, even when the face masks, think they're invincible and don't have to do any of the other work. That this taking care of yourself and getting healthy isn't in a pill. You have to actually do the work yourself, be motivated, and be accountable for caring and loving yourself, not just hiding with the mask. And the vaccine, you are still told to be social distancing afterwards because they don't know if it's even effective. So it's kind of just
Yeah.
frustrating that people don't get it.
Yeah. And I think people need to recognize that Debbie and I aren't anti-mask, but the problem is the mask has been this huge distraction. That's all
Yes.
about the mask. And it really should all be about your metabolic health, getting you to that best state of a fat burning metabolic health status as a prevention from not just COVID, but everything out there, cancer, heart disease. We're not talking about this thing. It's been a conversation. People have been talking about healthcare in the state, but of healthcare for years and kicking the can down the road. We went from the heart thing in the 60s to the low fat, low red meat, no eggs. And then all of a sudden we got this type 2 diabetes, obesity thing. And now we're talking about that. And, we're just talking about diet. We're not, most people go to diet and exercise, right? The diet and exercise pill. But, as you and I both advocate, it's like, why does everybody just go the diet? Nobody's saying the diet isn't important. It is important. Nobody says training isn't important.
Yeah.
It is important, but we compartmentalize these things rather than put them in this whole individualized matrix that needs to happen. But the problem is, and I'll say it here, the problem is there's no money in it.
Yeah.
So to
Dr.
make
Barry
it
said the same
economic,
thing.
there's no money in it. But to make money, you got to commoditize the consumer and commoditize the products and services, and then you can create a good business model. And you don't want to solve the fundamental problem, because if you don't have a fundamental problem to solve, then you don't create that economic engine.
Yeah. Yeah. Fasting. No one promotes intermittent fasting or fasting.
Yeah. You're not going to see as much as it's getting out there and trending. You're not going to see the snack companies.
Yeah. Fasted
You know,
workouts.
yeah, they're not going to pivot on selling their snacks on fasting.
Yeah. No. So that kind of goes into, let's get back to our main second half of the show today, tips on training the low carb athlete, talking about heart rate, steady state versus what I've been experimenting with, like run walking when you're doing endurance as we get older, not blaming aging or my age, but just embracing the change that might be more effective, doing more, like you said, your clients do minimalist training and doing more run walk and doing more sprints. And, how has your training methods changed to still burn fat and improve our health outcomes from our workouts, our mitochondria health? How's training for that? Because I know you're running tons of miles, and what's the way to have a good performance, but longevity from all that endurance training?
Okay, so it depends on where you are. Like there might be a few beginner listeners, but assuming most of these people are endurance athletes, they've got a good base, and because they're listening to you, they're aware of fat adaptation. They may not have drank that Kool-Aid just yet, but they're listening to us, and it's echoing. Once again, what were those evolutionary pressures that shaped us? I mean, look at there's actually been some studies on the Hudsu, which is the still wild offshoot of the Maasai,
Mhm.
and the they're out there. They're just doing exactly what us endurance athletes do to mimic nature. They're out there all day, physically active, but most of it's low intensity, low to mid, and they spend about 60 to 90 minutes a day in mid to upper intensity stuff. And so a couple of things that I've learned to kind of game that system, is one workout a week where you do extended physical activity. And for a lot of people who are time constrained, it might be a workout and then combining yard work or cleaning the house, or doing something with your kids, or going for a walk with your spouse to extend it out. I see that we really need to move beyond that 2 to 3 hour thing to kind of go up to 4 to 5 hours of just constant physical activity. You need to hydrate. You may need a few calories or a couple of Vespas, but you're not like bonking because you run out of energy. Your body is supplying that fat-based stream of energy to supply you. And once a week will trigger that physiology where the rest of the week, when you're doing your 60-minute, 90-minute, 45-minute workout, as long as you do a warm-up, your body doesn't know whether it's going out for 45, 60 minutes or going out for 3 or 4 hours. So it'll do what I call the switch. And with that warm up, you switch into that high fat burning mode, and it just kind of constantly do it. And this is a trick I've found that works really effectively with females. Is like one of the key things with females when you're trying to get them fat adapted is they do light physical activity to trigger that switch, to release the energy that you're signaling your body you're doing something, so you need more energy to fuel those muscles, so it supplies the energy. Because if a woman sits around and is sedentary, it starts to ping their hunger triggers. Whereas if they do some light activity and get that fat flow going, it doesn't have to be a hard workout or a long workout, just getting out, and it'll really attenuate those hunger triggers.
Mhm.
And so doing once a week, a long workout, every other week, maybe once every 2 weeks, trying to push that limit out a little bit long, that window, that really makes a fundamental physiological shift. Now, and then this seems counterintuitive, but once a week, you do a really high level hit workout, high intensity interval workout, where you, being fat adapted, you really need to push those limits, but for a very short period of time.
Yeah,
So
20 seconds, 30 seconds, or
20 seconds if you're a runner on flat ground. If you're doing hill repeats, it's 8 to 12 seconds. If you're a runner on flat ground, 15 to 20 seconds, but with a big full recovery. So, I have a workout, one of our signature OFM workouts is what I call the 2060, where you do 20 minutes, 20 seconds on with 60 seconds of full recovery. So that, and with that 20 seconds, you take the first 5 to 7 seconds to kind of accelerate. So you're not just going 0 to 60 at once. You're accelerating into it, and then you're holding it for, you know, 15 to 17 seconds at full out pace, and then taking that full 60 seconds to recover to get all that CO2 out, and then get all the
dog alert.
dog alert, to get all the CO2 out and get the oxygen back in, so you can stay in the fat adapt thing rather than, building up lactate and improving your lactate tolerance. Because you don't need to, if you're really well adapted, you don't really need to build up your lactate tolerance levels, because you're not producing the lactate to begin with.
Yeah.
Okay. And people will go off on this tangent just a little bit. Lactate is important, and they talk about lactate being good because George Brooks has done a lot of research on. Well, it's good up to a point. Your heart, your kidneys, other organs, your liver can process lactate, and they can even, your heart can use it as a fuel. Okay. But the reason you see lactate as a marker, commonly called lactic acid, is because once you've surpassed that rate that those other organs can absorb it, that's when it starts to accumulate, which means you're burning way too much sugar, right? And you can't clear it soon enough. So that's why the 2060s, you do use, fat adapted athletes need to do these really shorter intervals with full recoveries between each interval. So with a bike, it might be 30 seconds, it might be 45 seconds, it might be a minute on, but with 2 or 3 minutes. If you're doing a minute on interval on a stationary bike, you might ramp up and do a minute, lung buster, leg burner, and then take 2 or 3 minutes of spinning to recharge and get ready for the next one. So that's key. That's the sort of the pattern we follow, and do some tempos at like your math. Math training is big, but when you're fat adapted, once you're physiologically fat adapted by doing all the things, I've noticed the trend that you have to raise your heart rate. It's not 180 minus your age plus adjustments. It's more like 200.
Yeah, I've really noticed that from my own training the last few years, trying to get my running back, that I intuitively felt that I needed intervals and more speed work. So I just felt like this slog running that's like, okay, this isn't, I'm not improving here. And I've done endurance training for, 20 years, 25 years almost. So it's, I think as you get older too, you need shorter workouts and you need more intervals and strength training to help get faster and improve the aging process and not damage yourself by overtraining.
Well, and that's it. And that's the big thing about fat adaptation. I did a vlog recently about this, and, with your telomeres. But your telomeres are these strands of your DNA that get passed on through cell division, because your body's constantly dividing cells. And, as we age, that process slows down, and the more oxidative stress there is, the more chance of those telomeres shortening, which is what, accelerates that aging process. And what we've seen, with the athletes I've worked with, is they're saying they feel decades younger and they look decades younger because you're shortening that thing. And again, when I was talking about vitamin D, if you're giving your cells those building blocks of, really stable fats, like saturated fats, along with the MUFAs and the PUFAs, like your body and your cells are able to metabolize that fat, it's making for robust cells that don't don't have the level of oxidative stress because they're not burning glucose, but also when they do burn glucose, because you need a little bit of that once in a while to trigger everything, the adaptation, the hormesis, it can take it. And not only can it take it, but it can use the hormesis of a little bit of glycolytic burn to get stronger and more robust.
Yeah, interesting. So
Yeah.
that kind of goes with the next question on improve the mitochondria and tie in how Vespa works into our training and talking about what even is Vespa, but how that improves our performance and longevity by taking Vespa. So let's kind of
Okay.
dive
So
into
yeah,
that topic.
and I don't want to be like the big sales Vespa
No,
guy. I want
I
people to get
asked you. You're not
that.
selling
I
anything.
know,
I asked you.
I know, but people look at that and they say, but so I I became the distributor and an equity partner. I've got money, time, everything in this because I believe in Vespa.
Mhm.
A friend of mine threw me a couple packs in May of 2006 that says, "Hey, try this stuff." My friend Mojo swears by it. And at that time I was already 6 years into my fat adapted journey. So I was open to the idea of a product that burned fat because that was their whole stick is like this increases your fat burn. So I used it for my first race a month later, which was Western States. I finished under 24 hours in a year that only 52% of the field finished. It was the lowest finish rate in the modern history of the race. Got hot, people were dying. I had no trouble, and that was my first 100. So I believed enough in the product that you know, they were having trouble because back in 2006, Chris Carmichael and everybody else was pushing the carbs. Like, and Louise Burke, one of the biggest researchers in nutrition, was saying, we got to put the nail in the coffin on this whole idea of fat adaptation. It was a time when carbs were king and fat had no place in sports, and I didn't know that. so so I took a lot of ridicule and dismissal, but I knew this stuff worked. And I want people to, once again, let's go back to evolution. I don't have at this point, because of COVID, we haven't been able to get out the published man-made studies, controlled placebo controls. But I want people to think about Vespa because if you look at the ingredients of Vespa, honey, water, royal jelly, propolis, and the wasp extract, which is a peptide we get from the wasp. Um, these are all naturally occurring insect products. You don't need a PhD in food science or nutrition to understand what's in them. Okay. You look on the ingredient level of anything else and you better be a chemist to understand what's in it.
Yes.
Okay. So, it's actually classified as an acid food by the FDA, not as a dietary supplement. So once again, let's go to evolution. This product, for bees and wasps, they when you think about them in the animal kingdom, they're super endurance, super strength in what they do on a daily basis. And bees, ants, wasps, and termites all have this ability, and they get it partially from this peptide, the wasp extract peptide, the royal jelly. This peptide is what the larvae give to the adult so it can metabolize the fat in its thorax. When you look at these animals, they got that thorax in the back, which stores fat, but they can't eat solid food. None of these animals eat solid food. So they use that that peptide to trigger this. And these Japanese entomologists who were studying the agent giant wasp, the murder hornets, the actual murder hornets, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're like, man, these are not just the apex predator. These are the apex predators of the insect world. And it's like, what makes them have the ability to fly 60 to 100 kilometers a day and kill prey and then wrap it in a food ball and take it back and feed it? It's like, it was this wasp extract. So we're talking about millions of years of evolution that did this. And then they theorized, okay, well, animal cells across species are remarkably similar. Um, and so they hypothesized this would work on other animal species, including humans. And that's what got Vespa all started. Um, so that's what Vespa is. It's a natural catalyst to trigger your cells on a cellular mitochondrial level to oxidize a greater level of fat.
Yes, because I'm doing this experiment for my own self because N equals 1 on my performance and taking one before my long run, 30 minutes before on my Sundays when I run an hour and a half to 2 hours is all I can do. And I will find that as I struggle with fatigue in my long runs, as I mentioned in the intro and I've told you over the years, that it's the figuring out why is running endurance so hard with people who have chronic stress disease, as I say, metabolic chaos, that you really have to, be careful with your running, because it's, as my acupuncturist and Chinese medicine says, running is the worst thing for your body when you have stress and it's just stressful in your body. But somehow, something in the Vespa really helps my performance and but afterwards I'm like, not tired the next day and it's not so draining on it. So I was curious, like, okay, what is it? Because didn't want to take a Vespa for a long time because I was afraid of the orange juice in it, because I get headaches really easily from sugar and think orange juice, I can't have orange juice, I'm low carb. You just think you can't do that. So talk about like what is happening. Why is it improving your performance and recovery?
Okay, well, it essentially goes down to what we were talking about earlier, and that is, you're burning fundamentally more fat. And there is some unpublished research out there. It's not a controlled study. It was done by somebody who tested somebody who used Vespa fasted and didn't use Vespa fasted, and they saw a 0.9 gram per minute increase in fat oxidation, peak fat oxidation. So it's like they're doing a VO2 max at their peak fat oxidation. They went from 1.23 grams a minute of fat, which is a very good fat burner, to 2.22 grams a minute.
So I'm burning more fat with it than because I think I can go a long time without eating and running, but then that is helping improve my fat burning.
That's improving your fat burn. So this person, who's a research scientist, but she has to keep it unpublished, and I'll tell you why later. But anyway, she was, and she totally gets into the whole fat adaptation. She's a big advocate but for a lot of reasons she's kind of low key on it. But anyway, she went and tested a bunch of other athletes of all different diets, all different training modalities, endurance athletes for the most part. But she tested, she said she saw anywhere from a half a gram per minute increase to a full gram a minute increase. Vegans, plant-based, high carb, low carb, blah, 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 anywhere from half a gram to a full gram a minute increase just with the Vespa, from a fasted no Vespa to fasted with Vespa. So that's a huge thing. And for the audience, in case you didn't know, prior to the faster study, the body of science suggested that athletes were only the max ceiling of peak fat oxidation for an athlete was up to 1 gram a minute. Okay. And most well-conditioned athletes were only able to burn between 0.5 and 0.7 grams a minute. Okay. Faster changed all that because the mean fat oxidation, the average peak fat oxidation for the fat adapted, keto adapted athletes that they used in that thing was
male athletes.
Male athletes.
No females in that study.
Yeah. So but just so you know that just for the psychoscience, 1.442 grams per minute was the average of the fat adapted athletes, and the high carb athletes, high carb cohort, they were matched to and using as a control, they were burning right in that sweet spot of what the science said, 0.65 grams a minute, which is what the science to date suggested. Okay, same thing with their crossover is with faster, that crossover increased to 75 to 80% of VO2 max, whereas it was right in line. These well-adapted high carb people were right at like 60, 65%, which is what George Brooks's crossover suggested. Like the best a person can do for crossovers, about 65% of their VO2 max, where they cross over to burning more carbs than fat. So that's for context. So Vespa and the highest, so one of the athletes in there, John Rutherford, his peak fat oxidation was 1.79 grams a minute at faster. So he's the highest documented, published fat burner on record to date. So Jeff Browning, the guy who burned 2.2, he was 2.2. That's not published, but he was burning. Jeff Browning has a pretty good following in the ultra running world. You can look him up. He was burning over 2 grams a minute.
Wow.
So that's how much the Vespa's helping. And to a point, John Rutherford, before even Jeff did that test, he and I were talking about how we thought we could get it up to well into 2 grams a minute on the Vespa. And I ran with him a couple of weeks ago, and he's like, "Oh man, this is like cheating," because he hadn't used Vespa in a while, because he's a foreign service officer, and he's been stuck in Belgrade, Serbia, and they aren't providing any mail service of
Oh,
goods because of the COVID, and he just came over for a month for vacation. It was his first trip to the States in like a year with his family, and you know we went for a run about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I gave him some Vespa and left him with a couple boxes because he's one of my guinea pigs, and he's
yeah.
just like, oh man, I don't know why I never go off this.
But so to that point, it reminds me, I always feel like myself and a lot of people think that they do these fasted workouts and then they get done like, oh, I could do, 100-mile bike ride and I eat nothing but water and salt and I can go run 3 hours and I don't need anything. But my point I always want to make is, all right, could we have performed better? Yes, I can go for a long bike ride and not have anything, or a long run, but could I have performed better, faster pace, stronger, and burn more fat and less carbs and have better recovery and less stress on my cells, creating oxidative stress? And I think so many people are so type A driven, ambitious that we work with, and myself included, that we think, more is better. I can go fasted, go longer, and not be afraid to have a little something. Oh, break my fast. I'm not really fasted. They have that fear.
Yeah, no, and I'll give a couple things. People have to think about what's the context and the goal.
Yeah.
Okay, if your workout is to just go long and try to burn as much of your internal fat, you kind of want to dial it back a little bit and stay hydrated and take in minimal calories. If you're racing, my rule for racing is use whatever you want, whatever's available, whatever you like, and whatever works, and use as much or a little of it as you need to go fast, and that's kind of it. Now, once again, like you said, on this perfection thing, we get these hard, fast human rules, and it doesn't work that way, the physiology. And I want to make a very important point for your listeners with all this intermittent fasting, and intermittent fasting just sort of happens when you're fat adapted,
Yeah.
right?
Unintentional.
Right. Yeah, it's an unintentional byproduct. So all this stuff about intermittent fasting and the times to do it and feeding windows, forget about it. Forget about the stress of it. It just
Yeah.
happens. But to add to that, especially for women, don't be afraid to stay hydrated, salt and water and electrolytes. But if you need a Vespa or some broth to attenuate that fast, you don't want to get to the point where you're thinking, oh, I got to fast for 18 hours and you got 2 hours to go and all of a sudden you're starving. Because once you get that hunger trigger hit, you've already broken one of the goals of the fast. Because you're physiologically, if you're thinking about food and if you're trying to fat adapt and improve your fat adaptation, you need to stay like doing broth. You don't have to do full on bone broth, but just the cheap chicken stock with lots of sodium in there. The calories are trivial. Vespa has 19 calories on it. The calories are trivial, and you want to be unstressed in terms of hunger during your fast, because that has more of an impact on the benefits of fasting than trying to go a number like 20 hours, and then the last 4 hours you're like wiggling around and thinking about food, because once you start thinking about food and what you're going to eat after, physiologically your body wants to store everything it can get and turn your metabolism down so it doesn't release calories, because you're already in that starvation mode,
Mhm.
right? You want to be relaxed so your body will let the fat flow from your body and keep going. So attenuate the fast with things like Vespa, broth, V8 juice, V8 tomato
Hmm.
juice, or V8
I
full of
forgot about
electrolytes.
that.
Yeah.
I used to like that.
Yeah. No, before a run and after a run, that's what I always have, because it just stabilizes you. And then you have some V8 after a run or a workout, especially down where you are, where it's hot, and you have some water, get your hydration right, and then decide if you're hungry or not.
I
A
remember
lot.
V8 next time when we're riding in the summer and it was like 97 degrees and we're riding in Temecula in the mountains. V8 would have been really good.
Yeah. Chilled V8, but the thing is it's trivial calories. It's like the little
Yeah.
tiny cans are like 31 calories, and a big full 12-ounce can is like 60 calories. It's not, and it's low. It's not high glycemic calories. So it's gonna keep you totally hydrated and and attenuate that hunger trigger without breaking the physiology of the fast. You just people who are trying to hit this window of time and then they're struggling for the last couple hours, they've already failed. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because now their body wants to go into, ooh, I got to save all the
Starvation.
calories. Yeah, I want to store all the calories I can get. I want to release as little as possible, and that's the big fail.
Your
So that's what
stress. It's a stress now.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Fasting should be like we talked at the beginning of this fasting thing. Fasting should just happen as a result of being fat adapted.
Well, that's what I keep telling people right this week when we're recording. Keon is doing a 5-day free fasting challenge. And I keep trying to say it's, when you're fat adapted, I'm not intentionally fasting. Like we talked before that I didn't know I was doing OMAD. Everything has a name now, the keto and cardboard. There's all these terms like it's eat real food plan and I eat when I'm hungry. It happens to be now intermittent fasting, time restricted eating, one main meal a day, and everything has a word labeled to it. So I'm like, okay, I was doing this without even planning on it. So it wasn't I didn't have any intention to do it.
Right. And that's the point. It's like eh, when you really understand this, and I'm talking to the listeners, not to you, because I'm talking to the choir while I'm talking to you. When you really understand this, it's not this big, once you learn this, it's not this big structured thing. It's this sort of this chaotic thing that just happens. And that's how biology works. I mean, it's this big chaotic thing, but out of that, this order comes and the structure that you don't even think about. And that's one of the signs of really good fat adaptation, is because once you become fat adapted, it becomes a lifestyle that you don't even consciously think about. And you
Yeah.
just know when you get off, like say you're up all night, whether you're doing an ultra or you got to do something, it impacts you so greatly because you're so sensitive to it. You think, oh, I got to get a day of rest and get back on a regular schedule. Or if you know, have too much carbs for too many days. Like for me, if I have carbs here and there, it doesn't bother me. But if I do it for 3 or 4 days, then I really notice, I shouldn't be doing this.
What do you feel?
Oh, you feel inflamed, constipated. You feel like I'm carrying way too much fluid because when you start storing more glycogen, you're storing a lot more water, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, that inflammation. Like if I'm having too much wheat, my nose will start to itch. There's all these things that um, there's all these factors, and we could get into we should save it for another day, but we could get into gut health.
Yeah.
And I could give you some real insights into that because I've managed to really improve my allergy tolerances just by improving my stomach and gut health and the biome that goes with it. Right?
Yeah. Have you ever had your microbiome tested? Lab
No,
testing?
no,
I find
no,
it
no.
fascinating. I did BiomeFX, and we've had a few podcasts with Karan, and I'll send you the video we did on my lab results. And I was missing key bacteria strains, Saccharomyces, none were detected, and bifidobacteria and some other ones that are key in your metabolic health.
Yeah. And I take those on occasion, but because I've done the work to not just improve my biome, but improve the robustness of my epithelial cells, the
Yeah.
lining, the mucous membrane, the epithelial cells, and the villi of your intestinal lining. Um, it's rare. I mean, I'll take them when I need to, but yeah, I've colonized with all that stuff.
Yeah,
And
but I
people
don't
need to
think
know.
it's necessary that you have to take I take probiotics, but it's more for me, what's been helping is feeding my bacteria. So it's like feeding your garden, help the garden grow. You need to add the right
That's
fertilizer, and I'm adding polyphenols. I got cranberry polyphenols. I'm making sure I eat more Brussels sprouts and broccoli sprouts and all this different stuff that I wasn't doing for a while, because I think I'm not eating the organ meats from animals. So you do need to add more vegetables for your good prebiotic fibers to feed your microbiome, especially for athletes who
absolutely.
get leaky gut.
Well, absolutely. And that's the thing is like to be eating, you need to inoculate yourself with probiotics that colonize, not, and a lot of the probiotic products on the market, they don't colonize, which means you got to keep taking them, which means it's a good economic model. But once you have them colonized, you only need to kind of supplement with probiotics if you're doing like you're doing, consuming a variety of foods, especially enough vegetables to maintain that biome, the biome diversity,
Hmm.
right? Then you don't need to be taking probiotics. You just only, like say you get a case of diarrhea or you go on antibiotics, then you need to do the supplementation again, right? Or you eat a lot of processed foods because processed foods are full of preservatives, which will affect your biome. Those are the times when you need to take a colonizing probiotic. But once you colonize it like you've done, Debbie, you just need to be feeding it with the right kind of foods. But one of the things I've done is I know collagen's a big supplement thing, but I've gotten to the point where I do very little collagen supplementation, and I eat a lot of collagen-rich food. So I have menudo con pata, which is tripe with the hoof. I have caldo de res, caldo de pollo, chicken broth. I know that's not going to appeal to most white
See, that's
people.
why I have to do what I do because I'm not going to be eating the organ
Right,
meats and
right,
bone marrow, sucking it off the bone.
but that's I really think that it's so far superior to just
I know.
collagen supplementation.
Oh, I agree. It's better to get real food over any supplements just to get
Well,
it.
I mean, and think about it. I mean, tripe is just the stomach lining of the rumen of the cow. So, I mean, I know that sounds gross, but that's the building blocks of your
I
intestinal
know.
line, right? And to a point, one of the things that the Hudsu, these, the still nomadic offshoot of the Maasai, they're still hunter gatherers. One of the things when they kill an antelope or whatever, the first thing they do is they eat the raw tripe with they'll scrape off some of the stuff that's digesting in there, but it won't be all off there. So they're not only getting that building block, they're inoculating themselves with all
Yeah.
this biome. I know it sounds gross, but it's fascinating to me.
I know. And I agree. I mean, that's why I started to add some things in my diet because I'm not, I mean, I just started eating red meat a year and a half ago. So, and I just eat steak. I haven't really, I'm ventured outside of that area. But I think that's where it's important to people. I'm in this whole different topic, another show talking about the microbiome, but just people being carnivore and not doing any fibrous vegetables have to do the nose to tail, I think, and eat
Yeah,
the organ meat because that's where you're
absolutely.
getting the fiber you
Ab-
need for your large intestine and then the amino acids you need for your small intestine. I read Joel
yeah,
Green
yeah.
has a great
You're
book.
you're absolutely right about that because I think there's a lot of the carnivores kind of want another, thing that's come
Another
off
show.
the is another is well, it's another thing that's come off the rails, right? And I believe in it because you look at
Yeah,
how we evolved. That's
it makes
that's
sense.
really kind of, but we should be you can't be talking about eating 2 to 4 pounds of muscle meat every day and just paying lip service to the organ meat and the skin and connective tissue. You need to be more like I'm really big on the gelatin collagen side of things
Yeah,
now. And organ meat is so nutritious, you need very little of it. And muscle meat is so nutritious, you need very little of it. I mean,
yes,
it's like people don't realize collagen, gelatin is essentially 33% of our protein structure in our bodies.
hmm.
And so people don't get enough of that. So
So the last minute because then I have to get to webinar on organic acids test, but the recovery repair from endurance training, I mean, we're just talking about the foods you're eating. That's number one thing right there is having bone broth or having the collagen from food and having that for recovery repair. What are some 3 things that you do that we have talked about for improving recovery and repair from all your endurance training?
okay, so the big thing that I stress is let's instead of recovery, let's reframe the recovery. Recovery, if you're preventing the oxidative stress,
Yeah.
right, and the lactate load in the first place by being fat adapted, you don't have as much to recover from. Okay.
Yeah.
And here's the thing with recovery, and this is what everybody who's fat adapted and using Vespa notices: the recovery is insane. And not only are you preventing the damage and increasing your longevity, your telomeres, all this stuff, because you're not creating, you're actually allowing the body to take the hormetic stress, that adaptive stress of training effect, what they call training effect, and instead of the body having to just recover to get back up to baseline, it's actually that the hormonal response and everything from the the training effect, the adaptive stress actually goes towards making you stronger and more robust because that's what training does. And here's the thing, it not only makes you more robust and gives you better performance, but as you increase that aerobic fat adapted window of your tolerance to carbs goes up, and then the dietary restrictions go way down, and it becomes so seamless. That's what things like the reason a keto diet is so restrictive is the body of science is based on sedentary and metabolically compromised people by and large. Mm-hmm. But as you build a fat adapted physiology on an aerobic endurance base with some throwing in some strength training and some HIIT training to keep increasing that window, that tolerance thing. So for all these people who are sitting on the fence about low carb or carb restriction, let's talk to get fat adapted. Real fat adaptation isn't a low carb diet or a keto diet in practice. Once you get relatively well fat adapted, and the more you're willing to increase that aerobic fat adapted engine to burn fat, the less restrictions, and it becomes seamless and easy. I mean, most of the athletes I work with don't even think they're on a diet anymore or anything. Yeah.
Well, that's what I say. People say, oh, someone just texted me yesterday. Oh, I'm doing the keto thing. I got in the keto training. I'm like, I don't call it keto. I just call it,
yeah. And it's not it's not a high fat diet at that point. You're not doing these super high fat macros to blunt your insulin to keep you in ketosis. It's more of a balanced diet, but so the take home there is for recovery is let's prevent the damage in the first place, so we can not only shorten the recovery window, but get stronger, fitter, more resilient in the process.
True. That's a great way to wrap up our show today. I think that's a key point because it's all about performance and longevity. And part of that is reducing the oxidative stress and damaging those mighty mitochondria that we need to take care of and help improve the aging process. And if we love to do endurance sports, that it is not ideal for us for health to do these, like you do these 50-mile races. If you can just do 30, 45 minutes workout, but we prefer to do the long stuff and spend time outside and trail running and biking. But this is how we can do it to mitigate those damaging effects that we're putting to our body.
Well, but to a point, Debbie, when you think about those evolutionary pressures that shaped us, and to conclude, I mean, I always say to people, for a fit male or even a fit female like your age, doing a 50K or a 50-mile trail run, that's nothing more than what we evolved to do, which is be on our feet all day, hunting and gathering.
Yeah, trail running for sure. It's so much easier on your body and just moving.
Yeah. And so that was one of the things that Kathy and I, my client, when we ran JFK, it was her first 50 miles. She hadn't had any technical trail experience on the trail, but we were both just like flat out floored because metabolically, even with all her lack of training, we were just solid the whole day. Just there was no ups, no downs. We were just on point and, finishing. That's where we are. And then, I didn't have any soreness the next day. She did because she wasn't trained, but she was over it in 3 days.
Yeah. That's why
And
trail running is so great.
Right. She was working a 12-hour shift in the ICU on Monday. She raced Saturday, drove back on Sunday and, back to her regular schedule on Monday. So there you go.
That's good. All right, Peter, we'll put everything in the show notes and we'll put how to order Vespa so people can, do their own experiment on their performance gains and fat burning processes with the information you have on your website, OFM.io, right?
Yep.
And Vespa, what's a Vespa website for you? Is it
VespaPower.com.
VespaPower, that's right. Vespa.
And I'll get you. I'll pull up that coupon code. There'll be a coupon code for.
Oh yeah, we have one from last year. So I'll put that. I got to find the shows we did last year and link it into the show notes so people can learn more about OFM because we went into it more in depth last year. So.
All right. Thanks again, Debbie. Let's do it again.
Yeah, come on out and we'll do it live.
Okay, cool.
Thanks for listening to the Low Carb Athlete Podcast. If you have any questions, feedback, or topic suggestions, let us know on Facebook or at debbiepotts.net. You can help us to continue to grow by leaving a review on iTunes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.